Of the eligible voters in 2024, 31% voted for Kamala Harris, 31.5% voted for Donald Trump, right? He won from the eligible voters by 0.5% of the vote. 35% did not vote. So there were more people who didn't vote than voted for either candidate.
Welcome back to The Focus. I'm John Bruni. America has witnessed an extraordinary spectacle. President Donald Trump and his Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth summoning hundreds of generals and admirals from around the world to Quantico, Virginia, for what was effectively a dressing down. Hegseth called for all present to lose weight, get fit, and shave their beards, forgetting that many in the audience had expended their youth and physical fitness serving their country. Is it appropriate for senior career officers in their 50s and 60s to have the physiques of their 20s and 30s? What struck me most about Quantico was the language, this constant talk of a warrior ethos. Warriors fight for a code. Soldiers fight for a country. The moment you blur that line, you risk turning discipline into devotion and an army into a movement. MAGA supporters called the Trump-Hegseth Quantico meeting a demonstration of leadership and discipline. Critics called it a loyalty rally in uniform. Tonight we explore what this moment says about Trump 47's idea of power, from Quantico to Gaza, from the US courts to the Kremlin, and from Washington's paralysis to the world's wars, ongoing and potential. Joining me tonight from Dubai is historian and political theorist Dr. Roy Casagranda. Dr. Roy Casagranda is Professor of Government at Austin Community College, where he teaches political science, US politics, and Middle East affairs. He earned his PhD at UT Austin and is the founder of the Austin School Public Lecture Series, regularly appearing in media as a commentator on geopolitics, history, and political philosophy. Roy, welcome back to The Focus. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, John.
Gosh, I tell you what, it's only been 2 months, but the world has indeed turned since you were with us last.
Yeah, it's true. It feels like drinking out of a fire hose.
It's just too much. I wish it just would stop.
Yeah. What's the curse? May you live in exciting times.
Oh, God. Yes, indeed. All right, let's get down into it, right? Shall we? Roy, when a president and his defense secretary summon hundreds of flag officers to a choreographed gathering at Quantico, is that leadership or political theater with epaulets? Because beneath the optics lies a question. Who does the US military ultimately serve? The US Constitution or the commander-in-chief?
Yeah, so when you join the U.S. military, you swear allegiance to the Constitution, not to the commander in chief. And that distinction is actually extremely important. So in the 1930s, the Nazis tricked the Wehrmacht, the German military, into swearing an oath to Hitler. And the Wehrmacht did it. And then once they did it, they felt they were now committed. And it's one of the reasons why the Wehrmacht was as loyal as it was, because, at the end, when you sit down and sort through it, so many of the guys in the German military were furiously anti-Hitler, furiously anti-Nazi, but they went ahead and fought anyway. And the United States used to, I'm saying used to because it's clear it's not true anymore, at least for a segment of the population, pride itself on the fact that it was all about institutions and not about personalities. That at the end of the day, when individuals were swearing themselves to this greater cause, this cause of democracy, this cause of republic, this cause of the United States, we all know that a lot of that was fake, and there was this facade, and there was this underneath it all this brutal empire that was willing to overthrow democracies and do genocidal wars. But at least there was this aspiration that people were aiming at. And I think what Pete Hegseth did, what the president did at Quantico, should have set off really serious alarm bells. and for a segment of the population, I'm sure it did. It's just it seems like the U.S. public, for the most part, is comatose to this and isn't paying careful attention. Maybe they're just so shocked and stunned by this constant volume of crazy that they don't know what to do with it. But this should have been enough to set off protests. This should have been enough to set off uh, serious condemnation from at least retired military personnel. In Trump's first term, he ran into serious trouble with an admiral, a Marine Corps general, and even an Army general, where they began criticizing him. And General Marine Corps general was openly mocking Trump and made it very clear on multiple occasions that he would rally the military against Trump if Trump tried to go too far. But I feel like that's exactly where we are. We're going too far, and that's what this was. This felt shockingly similar to when the Nazis to swearing the oath to Hitler. It didn't quite get that far, but it had that kind of hint, that kind of, like you said, the difference between a soldier and a warrior. This kind of, they were trying to blur the line a little bit. And yeah, so I'm frightened.
A lot of the senior people in the American military, and I'm grateful to know some of them that just recently came out of the system. They know their history. They've made it their mission to learn as much about what not to do as
Yeah,
anyone that I could think of. The thing
yeah,
that struck me when observing Trump and Hegseth on the stage was the silence, and I think Trump himself said, he's never seen such a silent crowd before, and he was
yeah.
waiting for, I don't know what he was waiting for, but what do you think the silence spoke to Trump about his legitimacy in terms of what he was trying to, or how he was trying to strong arm the US military to be his tool?
you know, this feels tragic as I'm thinking the sentence that I want to say next. But I feel like we're at a stage where the Constitution's last hope is now the United States military. It's not the Supreme Court that's trashed. That's become an awful institution, and it's definitely not Congress. Congress abdicated its power decades ago. Um, the United States' last best hope is the United States military, and that's a scary place to be. I mean, that's where Turkey was for decades, and then Erdogan managed to upend the whole system, and now
Yeah.
the Turkish Republic is in ruins, smoldering heap, and it's this tragedy. Like, oh, it was such a good, stable republic. Like, all you can do is mourn its loss. And I
Mm,
feel like that's where we are with the United States. It's not a good place to be when the military is your last best hope. I
mm,
think the silence that he was hearing was them trying to let him know they were not on board. You said something really interesting, and it was that they know their history. That so I'll just kind of out my bias. I have a bias. My
mm.
mother was a civilian nurse for the United States Army. So I grew up around colonels and generals and majors and captains and non-commissioned officers. I have a soft spot for the United States military, but I also saw the inside of it. Not so soft that I ever wanted to join it, really. but it was, but I have profound respect for it.
Mm,
And one of the things that I noticed about the officer corps from my brief experience in it was, as a general rule, they were quite well educated.
yeah.
They did not like war. They especially didn't like the wars these dumb wars that the United States got dragged into. It's the
Mm,
civilian government that drags the United States military into these unwinnable wars. If it was up to the military, there'd be a lot fewer wars. And the wars that would exist would not be these nasty, resource grabbing wars. Um,
mm,
and that history goes way back before me. I mean, you can Smedley Butler, the Marine Corps general, wrote a book called War is a Racket.
mm,
And I think it was in 1920s or 1930s when he wrote the book. And he trashes the political decisions being made in his time. And he says that they turned the United States military into a force of thugs, that he was nothing more than a glorified thug. And so at the end of the day, I think that's what the silence was. It was they were trying to remind the president, we're not your guy. We're not going to let this happen. You're not going to trick us like happened in the 30s. This we're not going to go down that path.
You know,
Um,
Roy,
yeah.
I'm reminded of a of an interview we did recently with Ben Hodges. Now, Ben, used to run the U.S. Army in Europe, and I have to say, while we were having this interview with him, he reached into his bag and he brought out his dog-eared, underlined, copy of the U.S. Constitution with such great gusto and pride, and quoted a chapter and verse as to what the military ought to be about, which reflects exactly what you say.
Yeah.
And this is what I find so goddamn uh, sad and disappointing. It's that the people that they're trying to force into a corner are far superior collectively and individually to the people, the civilians who are now running it, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, like you've got this person, Hegseth, right? I mean, and he served his country. He served his country, and I've got look. I've worn the uniform as well. So anyone that wears the uniform, good on them, and you've done the right thing. But he also was, he got, gobbled up by Fox News, and he became a talking head, and that was what he was known for being. He didn't become a career officer. He didn't rise
No.
to any great rank. And to find himself at the center point of the Pentagon and then tell these generals who at one point were as equally ripped as him when they were far younger, right? And then
Yeah.
telling them to go lose weight because they're fat, shave their beards. I mean, I'm not so sure whether or not Hegseth has actually seen his commander in chief lately. He may not wear a beard, but I mean, there's a
Yeah.
rotundness to him that you can't ignore. And this
No.
and this is really quite terrifying in one place, and that is this notion that Hegseth told the flag officers, you need to row in the same direction. Now, to people who are unfamiliar with history, you'd say that was a unifying statement, something that sounds strong from a strong
Yeah.
leadership. But isn't it also a warning? Because, the first thing that crossed my mind when I heard that Trump was going to order all his senior flag officers from their posts around the world to Quantico, first thing I thought, gee, if I was an enemy of the United States, I'd know where I'd like to hit. And then secondly,
Yeah.
I thought to myself, is this the beginning of a purge? So was it a warning?
I mean, during Bush Jr.'s administration, there were multiple generals who sounded the alarm about the war in Iraq and said, we
Mm.
really shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
And Bush Jr.'s response was to fire it.
Mm.
And I think that's the great tragedy of the lessons of leadership that we're going to learn from the last few decades is don't allow your leaders to surround themselves with sycophants and yes men.
Mm.
You need to make sure your leaders are hearing things they don't like and don't want to hear. Like
Mm.
maybe you have to put them in a room, tie them down, and make them hear it. And I think that's, when you're a narcissist like Trump, I don't think he's capable of hearing anything other than what he wants to hear or or what's convincing to him. So if you're the last person to talk to him, you'll sway him one way or the other
Mm.
if you're convincing enough. The problem, of course, then is when he has his mind on whatever his next project of the moment is, because right, he flips from thing to thing to thing to thing, if you got up and said no, I'm against that, there is a high probability you're going to be one of those axe generals. And I think that's what this was in part, was it was a signal saying we're going to axe you if you don't toe the line. And that's a really scary thought, because at the end of the day, having a military that's just loyal to Trump is a catastrophe waiting to happen. um, Renaming it the Department of War was a real big signal to the world as well. It used to be named the Department of War, and there was an efficiency to the honesty of it all. Post Cold War or post World War II, during the Cold War, we wanted to seem like we were the good guys, so we named it the Department of Defense. it is a lie. We've never defended ourselves except the War of 1812, and technically we declared war on Britain. So we attacked Britain and then had to defend ourselves. And by the way, we lost.
Mhm.
If you ask the average American, did we win the War of 1812? They will say yes, but in reality, Canada beat us.
Well,
They burned.
if you ask your commander in chief, he'll say, since 1776, America has won every war: World War One, World War Two, all the wars between 1776 to World War One, and all the wars after World War Two. I mean, it's a burden, this success that you guys have.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
incredible burden considering we've lost about half of our wars. It's hard to convince people of something that isn't true all the time. It, you know, so we're in this weird space where so many of the things that we planted as seeds decades ago are coming back to haunt us. Like the Pledge of Allegiance that we make our children say every day, which is stupid. It's an oath. You should only have to ever say it once, and you should only be able to say it when you're an adult. You shouldn't have to say it every day as a child. That thing was designed to promote this idea of republicanism. And instead, we tried to turn it into a brainwashing tool and then added one nation under God, right? Like as if somehow it became this nationalist religious tool. And here we are, it's 70 years later, and that all that brainwashing to create this nationalist religious tool has borne fruit. And lying about all the wars that we lost and pretending that we won them has created this kind of weird nationalism that we shouldn't have, that we should have been able to reject and say, no, this doesn't make sense. We're not any better than anybody else. And the fact that we've done these things has brought us to this moment. Trump isn't a random accident. He's the consequence of Reagan cutting school funding. He's the consequence of Cold War propaganda. He's the consequence of bad education systems. You know, and so it's an awful place to be. The United States has proven that you don't want to have an uneducated electorate in an electoral republic. That's a
Well,
mistake.
I see that. The other thing that I really want you to hammer home, because you are, dare I say, one of the best historians out there, and you are, but how dangerous is it when dissent inside the ranks of the military becomes synonymous with disloyalty? I mean, I know that we've touched on it, but I don't know whether or not our audience fully appreciates it. And I want you to drive this message home to them if you can, because I think that we're at an inflection point where, okay, we've had the big meeting, everyone was quiet, everyone's now gone to their respective corners and are discussing their options. Whatever those options happen to be, it's not good for civil military relations in the United States. I can tell you right now, when people are, sort of whispering quietly to each other, saying, "God help me, what are we going to be doing with this lot?" That's always a bad move. But I think it really needs to be brought home to the you guys have got such a strange political system. You've got those who are hardcore MAGA. You've got those who are sort of floppy Republican. You've got, I don't know what you call the Democrats these days, but they're just not anywhere to be seen. You got Chuck Schumer, great. Anyway, but the thing is that when you talk about it, you're also talking about that great bunch of people who don't vote, who are just disconnected from everything. They probably sit down and say to themselves, "God, what a circus we're under." And I'm not going to vote for anyone. And they think that they're doing their patriotic duty by not giving succor to those people who are
Yeah,
soliciting their votes. And in actual fact, they're doing themselves a disservice. I mean, that's why I like the Australian system better than the American system, because at least we're forced to make a choice. I mean, there has to
yeah.
be some form of individual responsibility to the system that we're meant to be supporting. And if we don't give it that, then it's prey to all kinds of predatory political operators out there. And I think that the American system is typical of that, right?
I totally agree. So just to bring home your point about the people who are not engaged in the political system, uh, of the eligible voters in 2024, 31% voted for Kamala Harris, 31.5% voted for Donald Trump, right? He won from the eligible voters by 0.5% of the vote. 35% did not vote. So there were more people who didn't vote than voted for either candidate. And you just think, man, what would it have taken to have swung the vote? And like, if they had all voted for Jill Stein, she'd have been president. They could have, as a bloc, gone and voted third party and won it for her. Not that I want that outcome, but like, it's just to throw it out there, like, this is a really insane situation that the United States is in, where the non-voting electorate is so powerful. It totally makes the decision for the election by staying out of it.
Yeah.
So as far as the danger of this moment, I can't stress enough. History shows us over and over again that when you get to this moment, it's this crossroads. If you don't do the right thing, you will end up regretting it. In the United States, conversations about civil war coming into the foreplay a lot. The president has militarized the country, and he keeps sending the military to blue cities with the goal of, I guess, intimidating them. And we've gotten into this really strange place. So there was a movie, I don't remember the year, I'm making the year up, I just want to have a year, 1983, 1984, there was a movie called Aftermath. No, sorry, it was The Day After. The Day
The day
After.
after. Right.
Yeah.
1983, I think. Yeah.
Okay, 1983.
Yeah. Mm.
And I don't remember the guy's name, but there was a conservative who didn't like the movie because he thought it was too liberal, it was too leftist. So he managed to create another made-for-TV movie called America with a K.
Ah,
And it was about the Soviet occupation of the United States.
yeah.
And one of the things that I walked away from as a kid when I saw these two movies was that the liberals who made The Day After clearly spoke to a truth, and the conservatives that made America clearly spoke to a truth. It wasn't that one was right and one was wrong. There was something to be had by both. There was effectively a conversation on American TV.
Mm.
Now, I don't remember when America was made, but I think it was 87. So then, the Soviet Union's literally gone 4 years later. There was no real threat in that moment that the Soviet Union was going to invade and conquer the United States. But the threat of tyranny was, I really think, what was at stake. And in the TV show, the Russians managed to get an American president who's an agent for them. And then he brings the United States down. And the irony of that in this moment is, it's like screaming alarm bells in my head, because it's like, wow, did they call that or what? But
Yeah.
but the fact that conservatives are no longer of screaming against tyranny and talking about how we protect ourselves from this kind of situation, that's where I'm frightened. It used to be that whether you were liberal or conservative, it didn't matter. Everybody was against tyranny. Nobody
Yeah.
wanted that. And now we're in a situation where in the United States, the liberals are absent, and the conservatives have bought into this, and they're okay with it. And I can't figure out why anybody's okay with the direction we're going in. You don't allow dissent and conversation. How are we supposed to navigate this moment?
With regard to the idea of tyranny, I think a lot of people in the West have gotten tired of the overtly complex way things have been done. There was a simpler time, we can hark back to the 60s or the 70s, the whole Brady Bunch, all that kind of thing. Things were
Yeah,
mum, dad, the two kids, the dog or the cat or whatever, and it was simple. But now, we're confronted by a world where everything goes. Families have broken apart at record speed. Kids feel disconnected from their parents, not like the old generation gap. We have a chasm. We don't have a gap. We've just got a chasm between these new digitized kids that we've got who know their way around an Apple iPad but can't talk to another human being face to face. We're
yeah,
going through so much change that perhaps what we are doing now is we're thinking that a person like Trump or a leader like Farage in Britain, we don't really have a very strong right presence here in Australia, but I'm kind of thinking maybe Pauline Hanson. The people who flock toward those sorts of leaders are looking for a way out. They're looking for a way back into time where things can be simple. And so I think that they kind of confuse what they see as strength. No, actually, people tend to think that what comes out of many of these people's mouths is tyrannical, but they justify it as strength. So they sit back and they say to
Yeah.
themselves, oh, it's a bit hard, I know. And, okay, I've got a couple of gay friends, but I really don't like gays. And, Farage or someone else is saying something against them. So therefore it's okay and I'll back them because he's a strong leader. And what we need now are strong leaders to give us order back in our lives. And I think that that is something that really drives us to a great degree. Do you think that there is some sort of truth to that?
Oh, 100%. So, when Trump started his Reagan had a saying, it was make America great.
Yeah,
And then Trump came along and did make America great again. What I
yeah,
heard was make America 19th century again. That there was
yes,
at the end of the day, what make America great again, because make America great was an active thing you do now, here. There's no
mm,
reminiscing the past. You're just
mm,
working on it now. Make
yeah,
America great again means there was some past that was glorious that we need to get back to.
mm,
And that's exactly what I think people like Trump, Putin,
yep.
Orban,
G,
Farage,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, a
they're
lot.
all harkening back to some great moment in our past that,
Mm,
for the record, never existed. Like
mm,
there's this sort of myth about, oh, it was so wonderful. Rudyard Kipling wrote all those poems about how great empire was. Then when his son dies, he's like, maybe it wasn't so great after all. This
yeah.
was a terrible idea.
Mm,
And so, at the end of the day, there's this imaginary place that we think exists in the past, whether you're a fundamentalist or one of these reactionary people who vote politically for the strong man. And that's exactly what Hitler and Mussolini were promising. They
mm,
were talking about going back and putting things right and putting the family back together, and women need to be in the kitchen, and men need to be in the public. That
mm,
was their rhetoric, and we see that all over again. We're clearly in maybe a sine wave of some sort, and I
mm, mm,
wish we could get off the sine wave because I don't see what the point in going back is. The reality is we are an incredibly complicated moment. AI is going to only make this even more complicated. So if people are upset about 2025, they're really not going to like 2035, right? Like it's only going to get worse.
Roy, I'm not going to
I,
like 2035.
and so this is one of those moments where, yeah, you're right. All this technology, as great as it can be, maybe isn't as wonderful as we want it to be. We need to be criticizing modernity for so many reasons. But the goal isn't to get rid of modernity, it's to fix it.
Mm, mm,
It's
mm.
to make it so that it serves the people instead of the people serving it. And that's one of the problems of the moment we're in. We've made it so that we serve modernity rather than the modernity serving us.
Isn't there also the point that what passed as the system prior to Trump didn't do a good enough job in selling the benefits of the society they were trying to put onto us. You know,
100%.
we saw globalization, or they saw globalization as a great money-making enterprise where, all boats rise on the common tide. In actual fact, they were the boats that flew up into heaven and they left us all behind. And again,
Exactly.
we're being sold this technological nirvana rubbish, where I know that those people who can afford the robot butler will have a wonderful time of it. But
Yeah.
most of us won't be able to afford it, and so we're going to be the digital poor, or at least so far down the pecking order, it's not funny. So again, there's going to be these inequities that we're going to have to deal with as the waves or the tsunamis of change hit us across the head. So my question is, if these people are truly intelligent and they truly want to make it good for all of us, why don't they do a better job at selling what they have? Because at the moment they're doing, dare I say, a shit job.
I mean, they're doing a shit job because, in part, they're not sincere. They don't want us all to benefit. They want a
Right,
tiny percentage of them to benefit, and the rest of us
right.
can go screw ourselves.
Ah, yeah.
So one of the stats that should be shocking to everybody, but for some reason it doesn't have the kind of shock effect that I feel like it should, is the United States right now in terms of class mobility is where Great Britain was in 1973.
Mm,
So we are 52 years behind a country that has a hereditary nobility and a hereditary monarchy in terms of class mobility. Like that's
mm,
shocking. Like how? I feel like third world countries don't have that kind of a stat.
mm,
And another stat that is coupled to it, because it's 1973 again, is the top 1% made 8% of the wealth. And now the top 1% makes over 40% of the wealth. The, what's happened is that the United States has gone the opposite direction than most of the world. Most of the world is the poorest and the richest are coming closer to each other. The United
yep.
States has been going in the opposite direction for 52 years by design. That was Nixon's mandate in his mind, anyway.
Mm, mm,
Uh, Reagan didn't make it any better. Clinton didn't make it any better. George Bush Jr. didn't make it any better. Their goal was to to expand the gap between the rich and the poor. When you shrink the gap, you end up with a more robust economy, and that's when all boats rise. Post World War II, we were in that stage, and we had the best economy the world has ever seen, and it was because you could get a job as a
mm.
middle class person and make real money.
Yep.
And when you look at wages today, you realize that's not an option. Gen Z knows they'll never own a house and they'll probably never own a car, even. And they've written it off. They've given up at some level. They've surrendered. They're also trying to figure out how they're going to survive global warming and World War III and Civil War. But uh, it, I guess where it's shocking is how did we get here? Why did we let this happen? Why isn't it that we're at the height of civil society and civilization? One of the things I think we put our emphasis on the wrong places for technology. Instead
Mm,
of focusing on space missions and how we could improve people's day-to-day lives, we've focused on how we can entertain each other better and how we
yep.
can communicate quickly with each other. Don't get me wrong, I love the communication. We're doing it right now. It's just
Mm,
I feel like the vector was in the wrong, the arrow was going in the wrong direction. We should have been focusing on not how we can plunder and make money, but how we can make everybody's lives better. And to a degree, some places did, right? I
mm,
think Europe, Australia, New Zealand, there are Japan, South Korea, there were places that were trying to make the world a better place for their civilians. A lot of them failed, and the fact that we're now in this moment is in part because of that, because there were people who went, I don't like what the conservatives did. I don't like what the liberals did. I don't like what the socialists did. They didn't
mm,
get us anywhere. I'm going to turn to the fascists now. Maybe they'll do what the other guys couldn't do.
mm.
And
Yeah.
that's an unfortunate, tragic place to be in.
I recently saw some interview with Timothy Snyder. I think he's a professor, also I don't know, maybe a New York Times bestseller or something. He wrote or has written books on, modern fascism and how he sees everything being fascist. But there was one little throwaway that he gave to his audience, which I thought was really quite interesting, and that is that the fascists of old at least had some form of communitarianism to them. I mean,
That's true.
the Nazis may have hated the Jews and the disabled and everyone else, but for the Germans, they did okay. For Mussolini, he wasn't quite as extreme as Hitler initially, but there were many people who benefited from Mussolini and fascism. In Italy, but you don't see that with the so-called modern corporatist leader of today. I mean, here it's just, grab what you can, make hay while the sun shines and screw everyone else. It's kind of like the Marie Antoinette version of
Yeah.
fascism, right? So I don't know. I mean, when they use the historic fascism and try to overlay that onto the modern system, my skin crawls slightly because it's not that. I mean, what made fascism so dangerous was that there were as bad as the people were who enabled the Holocaust and everything else, they made stuff happen. The people that
They
we
did.
currently have, they don't make much happen because the system doesn't allow it. There's still some checks, some balances, some people who white ant from the inside. There is no strong Hitlerian figure that sits in Washington, D.C., thank God, yet. And Trump may have illusions of him being that person, but he's, what is he, 80 something now and not in really good health. And I'm not so sure Hitler at his most drugged out stage was a picture of health in comparison to Donald Trump. So,
Yeah.
I'm not one to actually, put Hitler on a pedestal, but from a historic perspective, there are things that I think that those people on the left also make the mistake of, and that is they put too much of an emphasis on the historic example without calling what it is now. Today, these people are not as competent, not as
That's
educated,
true.
because a lot of the people
Yep.
who were embedded in those older systems did have a sense of their nation and their people in the world in a way that the Trump administration and the coterie of people he's got around him simply don't have that education. They just landed a great job and they're living the life of Riley. Do they
Yeah.
care? No. you know. So
No.
I don't know.
I saw a member of the Trump cabinet. I can't even remember who it was recently, and I'll try and come up with it.
Mm.
They do a video where they're like, "We used to make great things in the United States," and they started talking about going to the moon, and
Mm.
like, and you're like, no, that was Germans who did that. That was Venom and Brown. Like that was not USers doing that.
That was a Nazi rocket. The whole Apollo
That
program
was a
was based on
Nazi
Nazi
rocket science.
technology. Let's not
And
talk
you're
about
like,
the war.
oops.
Yeah.
You should have read a little history before you started talking.
Yeah, yep, yep, yep. That's so true. That is so true. But it's a terrible thing to say, but there is this, I don't know, is it a willful ignorance? When we talk about all of this, it's so easy to say one thing and still find yourself in that trap. Because I mean, while I was listening to what you were saying about there was a time, and then earlier we said we mythologize a golden age, are we ourselves in this conversation also mythologizing a golden age prior to Nixon, maybe from Roosevelt to Nixon, and that was the age
Yeah,
where America blossomed? And in actual fact, that was just an illusion that we grew up thinking and are now carrying into our adulthood. I don't know. I mean,
for sure it was
sometimes,
illusion.
yeah, yeah,
And partly because women didn't have very good rights.
right,
Black
right,
people, brown people
right,
were. No, for me, the interesting thing
yeah,
about that period is the economy. The
yeah, yeah,
economy was rocketing into the future.
yeah,
And I don't know why the lessons of that economy didn't get transferred over. Like there was like this ideological shift where it was like, we can't tax the rich, otherwise it'll wreck the economy. It's like, no,
mm,
Eisenhower, the conservative Republican president,
yeah,
put the top tax bracket at 92%. He taxed the hell out of them
yeah,
and created this rocket ship for the world,
yeah,
well, for the United States anyway. So yeah, no, you're right though. We do mythologize the past. All of us do at
mm,
some level because there's always like
mm.
this one, we did that right there. But at the same time, I do think some of us are trying to be at least a little careful.
Yeah, we put some checks and balances on ourselves, at least. At the very least, we do that. But that's certainly interesting. So when you talk, when you spoke earlier about the idea that there was a confluence of issues that formed the current system, to me, I couldn't help but feel that maybe there was I know it's not, Roy. There was some form of little conspiracy theory behind that. Do you have a confluence of influence because the stars are aligning? I mean, what mystical paranormal activity caused the collapse that we're seeing in front of us? I mean, was this deliberate? You're indicating that there was a sense of deliberateness in how we got here. So therefore, for those people out in the community who are watching this, they may think, well, gee, they're all a bunch of conspiracy theorists, right? Because they're thinking that, people were deliberately setting about trying to create the system that we're now laboring under.
Well, so that I've always been fascinated by this idea of conspiracies because, right, once you get two people together, there's a
That's a
conspiracy.
conspiracy. Yeah. Yep.
So the Nixon administration believed that it had a mandate that it achieved in 1968. Now, for the record, they cheated, and that's how they won the 68 election. They cheated again in 72. They didn't need to. They would have won anyway. They wouldn't have won 68, but they would have won 72. Congress needed to bust Nixon for something, so they busted him for 72 because 68 was, they were worried it would shake confidence in the election.
Mm,
So, but Nixon still, even though he knew he cheated, he still believed he had a mandate. And he believed his mandate was to roll the clock back to something more like 1948, to,
mm,
to get rid of the 60s, to decouple civil rights and women's rights. And, like he thought that. And he set about trying to create that system. That's what the 6 years he was president, that's all he did. And he did successfully manage to turn some of the vectors around. Reagan came around, and Reagan wanted to expand upon that and take it further down that direction. George Bush Sr., ironically enough, disliked so much of what Reagan did. He spent a lot of his 4 years trying to go back to old conservative values.
mm, mm, mm.
Clinton was actually very much in alignment with George Bush Sr. So he kind of, Clinton was sort of another 8 years of George Bush Sr. And then George Bush Jr. burnt it all to the ground and went
Yeah.
back to sort of this Nixon, Reagan style goal. And in other words, there was a conversation in a way, and it was a struggle. And in the end, the side that was trying to increase the gap between the rich and the poor won. It was an ideological struggle. It was an economic struggle. It was driven by greed. It was, and in my mind, it was foolish. We should have been trying to do what Eisenhower did.
Mm,
That's where I get idealistic. I think Eisenhower had the right economic policy. I hated his foreign policy.
mhm. Yeah.
There's so much. There are plenty of things to dislike Eisenhower for, but his economic
Mm,
policy domestically was good. It was a solid
mm,
policy, and so I think we got to this point on purpose because the side that wanted to get here wanted. Now, having said that, I think that some of them are starting to regret it, and they're starting to think I'll download my brain patterns into a computer and send it to Mars, and now I can
yeah.
live for all eternity, as if the world needed that to happen. And they've sort of they're like the rich on the Titanic running for the lifeboats, and I'm thinking, dude, no, let's patch the hole.
Mm, mm.
Let's not abandoning grabbing the chandeliers and running for the lifeboat doesn't seem like the right thing to do right now. I think we should figure out how to patch the hole in the ship.
All
But
right. Okay. So, Roy, I mean, in a republic like the United States with no organized loyal opposition, what is one to do in terms of managing oneself in all this madness? If you were a non-voting American, do you just hunker down and wait for the cycle to become a little bit more friendly disposed? Many people that I have spoken to have absolutely no confidence that there is anyone on the Democrat side that can actually lead. Now, I mean, people have been saying that Gavin Newsom can lead. People have been saying that Whitmer can lead and Shapiro can lead. But these people aren't coming in. They're not being deliberately brought into the tent. And you would imagine that if they wanted to run a successful campaign against Trump and his successors, they have to start now because the longer they delay this process, the longer the Trumpist and other successor administrations will have to dig down deeper into the political ground. So it'll become very hard to, root them out if that's exactly what is needed to be done. What can you say about the political process in the United States today? Is it really broken? Because it does seem like it is broken.
So I hate to do this, but I'm going to anyway. I think part of the problem was that the boomer generation in the Democratic Party just didn't want to retire. They wanted to be in Congress, they wanted to be in power until they died in their 90s.
Hmm.
And they're not the only ones, right? There are silent generation politicians that stuck around for too long as well.
Yeah.
But Bob Byrd, for example, Strom Thurmond, for example. But
Hmm.
but but at the end of the day, the Democratic Party did an awful job of bringing X generation in and even millennials in and sort of pushing them into positions of power so that they could be the replacement. They
Yeah.
didn't apprentice them. They jealously guarded their power, didn't share it. And that's one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in. In previous generations, you had this kind of transgenerational political apparatus and people who were loyal kind of got pulled up the ranks and they worked their way into the new position as the older generation retired out. So that's part of the problem for sure. Another part of the problem is civilizations come apart. They go into a malaise and they stop producing the kind of leadership that's needed for the moment. They stop being innovative. They get tired. They get tired and they get old. And
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things we're seeing with the United States. Certainly, we're seeing that with several countries in Europe as well, where
Yeah.
there's almost a sense of, oh, I'm spent, I'm tired, I want to retire.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's like, well, that's not great. What needs
Yeah.
is you need to have a new like energy source to reinvigorate and
Hmm.
re-empower so that the next generation can continue.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know how you get there other than uh, crisis, right? In a way, okay, so there's a behavior people with ADHD will do.
Hmm.
They will procrastinate until it's too late. The reason is because the governor that regulates dopamine in the brain in an ADHD person doesn't work the way it does in a typical person. It only works when you have adrenaline. So if you procrastinate until it's too late, you now have adrenaline. Now you're getting dopamine. And in a way, I feel like that's what's happening in the United States. It's
Right.
just been in this constant state of procrastination. At some point, it'll reach a crisis moment. The crisis will give us the adrenaline we need to fix things. I just wish we didn't have to go through this process. But that's what I keep hearing is we're just going to wait until we get to that crisis moment. And then hopefully enough people will get involved that we can fix things. I don't trust that that's a good
That's
mechanism.
crazy talk. That's absolutely crazy
Yeah.
talk. I mean, it's like you've got a hole in the road. You know there's a hole in the road. You don't know where it leads. It could be a bottomless pit. But rather than walk around it, you walk into it. You
Yeah.
deliberately walk into the hole. So I'm wondering what psychology allows that to I mean, yeah, I get the fact that, people are old, people are tired, people just give up and they don't care. But then, if they don't care, why are they still there sucking the teat or sucking off the teat of the state? They may as well just
Yeah.
look. It's not that many of your senior Democrats are not wealthy enough to just retire gracefully to Florida and live out their lives in splendor. They can do that,
Yeah.
maybe five or six
Yeah.
times over, right? So it's not like they're all scraping around on minimum wage trying to make ends meet. So I don't understand what the hell. I mean, unless they're just greedy bastards, and I mean that's also part of human nature. People can be greedy, and when the greedy get needy, nothing good comes from that. So I don't know. But yeah, how does all right, so let's take a step back. Project forward, if you will, with your historic understanding of the United States. Will the Democrat Party remain the Democrat Party, or will it be replaced in 2030, or 2035 by another party entirely? Maybe another left-leaning party, or a centrist party, or any sort of party. Something that is a party of action as opposed to a party obviously in decline.
Yeah, so because of the way the United States' political system is set up, single member district representation, the system we inherited from Great Britain and never altered, it really will end up always being just two political parties. The
Mm,
math makes it so that there's very little space for a third party to form.
mm,
In the United States' history, we have had one third party eventually replace one of the two main parties, and it was when the Republican Party replaced the Whig Party.
that's right.
Happened
Yeah.
one time, and it
Mm,
and basically it triggered a civil war.
mm, mm,
And
mm,
Abraham Lincoln was the Republican that pulled it off.
mm,
So it was an extremely extraordinary set of circumstances, an extremely brilliant politician, a crisis of civil war. There are so many things that went into place to make that a possibility.
mm,
I think that based on the history of the past, replacing the Democratic Party isn't a realistic option. What might happen, and this is, I guess, what I'm hoping happens, is that Gen Z will feel the vigor of the need to survive, the need to, try not to do a World War III, try not to do a civil war, try not to die because of global warming, and will take over both political parties. That at the end of the day, they will rise up through the ranks in both political parties and restore order and calm and bring back some measure of reason. I'm saying that because I started teaching X generation. I'm X generation, but I started teaching X generation, and I've worked my way through the millennials, and I'm now in Gen Z. And I see a lot of promise and a lot of hope in my Gen Z students. I really like them. I think that they're just cynical enough that they're not suckered into
yeah.
believing nonsensical stuff, and
Yeah.
and they're just motivated enough that they might provide the energy that the system needs to stave off most disaster. I guess where I'm scared is, one of these big players, the Elon Musk, like what is their end goal? Where are they trying to take the country? What kind of economic force are they going to put on uh, a Gen Z rule Democratic Party or a Gen Z rule Republican Party going forward? Like the fact that you have campaign financing and you have super PACs and there's all these, old institutions that just won't go away that kind of corrupt the system makes me nervous about our prospects because at the end of the day, I think uh, greed is too much of a motivating factor for the powerful and they're
Mm.
not willing to set aside their own personal greed.
And in the meantime, we have the National Guard that's been rolled out in Oregon, California, Washington, D.C., and now Chicago. So,
Yeah,
what's the enemy here? Is it crime? Is it protesters, illegal immigrants, or political defiance generally defined?
yeah, I think it's the last part, right? Because,
Right.
immigrants don't commit more crimes. They actually commit fewer crimes. So if you wanted to lower crime, you'd kick out the natives and bring in the immigrants. The immigrants work harder. They get paid less. They call in the sick less. So again, I don't see what the problem with the immigrants are. Crime rates have been going steadily down in the United States, except for murder, which has been going up since 2020. It had been going steadily down, and maybe it was 2019 when it started to turn around, and then COVID shot it through the roof. But like armed robbery, that type of crime has been steadily going down. So in so many ways, we're better off than we were. Our cities are much safer, except for Chicago. Chicago has a really high murder rate. But interestingly enough, that's not one of the first places he sent the National Guard. And what's the National Guard going to do for murder rate anyway, right? Like run into people's homes. Most of the murders are done between relatives and friends, or they're mass shootings. Are they going to go to the movie theaters and the schools and protect the moviegoers and the children from the mass shootings? Obviously not. So this is clearly, since the cities that he's targeting are all blue cities, this is clearly politically motivated. And he has said that he wants the military to use the cities as an opportunity to practice, which is not a
Yeah.
to say.
That's, I mean, I thought when I heard that, you've got to be kidding me, right? I mean, and I'm sure that I mean, there must have been the most silent gasp in that audience of of well-trained, highly educated military senior officers
Yeah.
who just must have thought, what am I listening to? What rubbish
Right.
is this? I mean, it's a complete misunderstanding of the military. I mean, and even the National
Complete.
Guard, because the National Guard, look, I mean, there is something that I'll say about the National Guard from what my limited understanding is, you know, in the public imagining, the National Guard is still something like the 1960s, not really well armed, not really well
Yeah.
organized. It's kind of like
Yeah.
a state paramilitary force, or not even a
Weekend
paramilitary
warriors.
force. It's like a police force, a badly equipped
Yeah.
police force. But that was the 1960s. The National Guard
Exactly.
today is an adjunct of the military. It is equipped with
It
some of
is.
the finest military equipment that the military use, and
Yeah.
their operational aims and directives is to go into countries and kill people. It isn't to
Exactly.
police anything, right? So they see a threat,
Yeah.
they shoot it dead. They don't sit down and question or interrogate or do anything. So I don't get this. I mean, it's like no one obviously decided to tell the president because they were fearing for their own jobs, no doubt, that this is going to be a bad idea. But strangely enough, now having heard what you said about the military, I think now there is a very real possibility that maybe someone from the rank and file is going to step into a position where maybe the Trump administration isn't going to have such a great run. And if that's the case, what does it say about democracy in the future? God only knows. But anyway, what you mentioned illegal immigrants. I mean, I know there are many who will say that illegal immigrants have always been a source for organized crime. Outlaw organized crime, like for instance, you've got your bikies, you've got your drug runners, you've got your mafiosa, you've got all these sort of elements. And I think in the public imagination, yeah, migrants are great, and yeah, they can certainly serve the economy, but there is also the undesirable element that comes over the borders as well. How do you address the public concern about the criminal element embedded within migrant communities? Because they're not all coming over as saints and law-abiding citizens entirely. Most of them are, but not all of them.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's just that any population, you've got good people and bad people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
In the
So
United
so
States,
in the
immigrants
sorry.
commit fewer crimes than the people that are citizens.
Hmm.
So statistically, they're a better population, at least in terms of crime rate. It's not that
Oh,
they have a zero crime rate. It's just statistically. So at that point, then, and I know this doesn't work, right? Most people don't care about statistics. They only have emotions and they don't look
hmm.
at the numbers. But if you just look at the numbers, there's no reason to fear the immigrant population. But obviously people do, and it's in part because people don't understand the role that immigration plays in their own lives, especially if you live in the United States. I had a cousin who, was railing against immigrants, and I said, "You do realize that our grandfather came over in 1904? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
how many generations away from speaking Italian right now? Like, I don't
Mm, mm, mm,
understand
mm, mm,
why this is
mm.
even an issue with you." So
Yeah.
there's that. But then there's also a fun little stat, and Germany is the exemplar of this. If you look at votes for the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, the neo-Nazi party,
Mm.
they run on an anti-immigrant platform. It's the map of East Germany and West Germany. The
Yes.
AfD does the best in former East Germany. Like, it's crazy when you look at the map because you're like, dude, this is the Cold War all over again.
Hmm.
That's also the exact same map for where the immigrants are. The immigrants are in
Mm.
the former West Germany. They're not in the former East Germany. And we got to remember most of those immigrants aren't voting. They don't have citizenship. So that means that the Germans who do vote, who have constant contact with immigrants, aren't voting for the guys who are anti-immigrant. The Germans who have very little contact with immigrants are the ones who are. And
Mm.
that tells a lot, I think, about the role that ignorance plays in the anti-immigrant sentiments that we see everywhere in the world, and
Mm.
it's a mistake. Immigration in the United States fuels the U.S. economy. Without it, we
Mm.
would have collapsed a long time ago. Um, I just don't understand where that xenophobia comes from people who are a bunch of colonial settlers or immigrants themselves. Like it's such a weird. Did you not look behind you? Look behind you.
Well, to what degree, Roy, does social media play in fueling this? And not even social media, but broad-based normal media. Because, back in the day, before social media, we had this claim that journalists are like ambulance chasers. If it bleeds, it leads. I see the same sort of psychology being peddled all over the digital space right now. And it's accentuated by the fact that, we used to say that the Vietnam War was the television war. Well, right now, every war, every problem is on this bloody device. It's in my
Yeah.
pocket. Every time I pull it out, my doom porn just pops up, and there I am. I'm in the thick of things,
Yeah.
and I can see it. And that, because we're emotional creatures, and the algorithm is designed to trigger emotional responses from people, our logic gets thrown completely out of whack. And so it's easy to understand in this age in particular that technology plays a massive role in the way that we see each other and the way that the political and social divisions rise up. But who's even contemplating reining this stuff in? I mean, I know the European Union have regulatory laws that they're trying to sort of implement in various countries and in various ways. And here in South Australia, we have now implemented, at least in a statewide level, some restrictions on children using TikTok and various other platforms and devices up until they're 16 years old. But, the genie's been released from the bottle. No one is prepared to rein in the Silicon Valley billionaires who created this technological nirvana we're living in, which only means that they will continue peddling their bullshit online, which will continue to warp our societies in the way that they've been warped. So, what's the answer here? Is the answer to find regulatory bodies that can clamp down on this stuff? Or do we ban the platforms entirely and go back to pen and paper? I mean, what would be the thing that you would do if you were king of the world?
Yeah, I don't know. I wish
Mm,
I had answer. And the reason I'm hesitating is regulatory stuff I think could help a little bit, but there'll always be a way to get around it. Like people will just install VPNs and
yeah,
they'll somehow jump the system.
that's right.
The way this works, of course, the way the algorithms work is as you click in, it watches everything you do. So exactly how you're scrolling is actually being measured. So the
Mm,
the nanoseconds you spend looking at something are being measured. And the reason is because they're trying to optimize the things that you'll look at. And it turns out people really get off on things that make them frightened and angry.
mm,
And so
mm.
you can, and politicians figured this out a long time ago. If you have
Yeah,
an angry population, they'll vote for you. And the
yeah.
same is true for the algorithm. If there's an angry person, they'll watch. So it creates this sort of feedback loop where the
Mm,
person's biases get reinforced and you tunnel into these conspiracies or whatever, into xenophobia or however you end up going. And so I just don't know how to do that without somehow overcoming that. Maybe we need to take a step back and figure out how to pull back from all the greed so that the algorithms aren't constantly doing that. Right? I don't know
yeah.
how you tell the capitalist class with all their wealth, all their trillions of dollars, hey guys, it's not great what you're doing, um, without some sort of serious reevaluation of capitalism. Having said that, I live in a
Yeah.
right now that's 89% immigrant. And if you take your laptop and you're in a restaurant and you put it on a table and you walk away and you go do something for an hour, when you come back, your laptop will still be there.
Hmm. Hmm.
One of the great tragedies of people who live in the UAE is they'll travel to another country and they'll forget to lock things and they'll get robbed because
Yep.
they're so used to not having to look over their shoulders that they've
Mm.
sort of become these like innocent little lambs running around.
That is so true. Having had my own experience there, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's 89% immigrants, and
yeah,
that's the environment that's here. So if immigrants are a
yeah.
problem, then how come this isn't a nightmare?
Yeah, you're right. But well, I mean, okay, so getting back to the United States and immigrants, the Trump administration has been around long enough now to start getting some data, some economic data, as to what effect the ICE raids are having on immigrant communities, especially in the black economy where people have been hired by others who know full well that they're not citizens, nowhere near getting citizenship, and are going to be off book, basically. But this is what kept the US economy growing and going for such a long period of time.
Yeah.
Now, what is it, 8, 9 months into the Trump administration, are we seeing that ICE has kind of wrecked a little bit of the economy? Are we seeing some of that play out now? Because, are there farms that go without laborers, cheap laborers to pick the beans and the corn, or what's going on with that?
I only saw that in the first Trump administration, to the point where you were seeing ads being put in newspapers or on TV in California going, you know, that job that you thought Juan took from you picking blueberries? Well, it's open. Come get it. You know, you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
you can the sarcasm in the farmers.
yeah.
You screwed us up and took away my labor.
Yeah.
Where would we replace this? In the first Trump administration, one of the problems that we were having was uh, pruning grapes. When you want to make wine, you want to prune the grapes so that there aren't as many, because the fewer the sweeter, right? And you want to
Mm.
get it just right, because if you're trying to grow a dry wine, you're going to prune them differently than if you're trying to grow something
Yep.
that's sweeter. And it turned out there were all these undocumented immigrants who were super geniuses. They knew exactly how to prune these plants. And it
Mm.
took years and years and years of experience to build that knowledge. And all of a sudden they're missing. And the wine industry took a hit.
Yep.
And so there was all these knock-on effects. I'm not sure we're in deep enough to see the full effect just yet, but there
Right.
are some coming to the surface. One of them is like, so Governor Rick Perry was a conservative Republican. I want to say it was 2003, but don't quote me on the year, give or take 2 years. It might have been 2005. Governor Perry really pushed hard to make it so that if you were an undocumented immigrant who was brought to Texas as a child, so it wasn't your choice, it was your parents' choice. But
Yep.
now you're an undocumented immigrant with no pathway to citizenship. So you're just
Mm.
sort of stuck in this void. Again, no fault of your own. You would get to go to Texas universities as as if you were a Texas citizen, so you could pay in-state tuition instead of having to pay out-of-state tuition. And Democrats and Republicans lined up behind this. The conservative Republican governor pushed it. It passed. It has been the law of the land until this year when it was overturned. The estimate is it will take $420 million out of Texas's economy every year going
Right.
forward. So about $500 million worth of damage to the Texas economy, because now there's this whole chunk of the Texas population that should have gone to a university and gotten an advanced degree and entered the workforce that way, and they won't be, because
Mm.
they won't be able to afford tuition as a foreigner. And you think, what was the point in that? It's not those kids' fault that they're there. They're sort of innocent victims here.
Mm.
And it used to be, there was a time when conservative Republicans would have thought that this is horrible. Why are you picking on those kids? And yet here
Mm.
we are. And it shows to me that people have lost their values. That we're no longer talking, you know what I mean? Like the principles that motivated you to claim you were a liberal, or motivated you to claim you were a conservative or a socialist or whatever your shtick was, that those principles now have just been thrown out the window, and all anybody cares about is, I want my side to win.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, now it's a game instead of an actual honest conversation about what needs to be done. But $420 million a year is not nothing.
Okay, so Roy, how hardened are the American people to the vision that they're starting to see, where ICE agents are arresting grandmothers and ripping them away from their grandchildren in
Yeah.
public, or, having children zip tied, after they've been removed from bed, barely clothed. I mean, are the American people that hard that they don't care and they think that, you know, Trump and his ilk are right, irrespective, and these people deserve what's coming to them? I mean, what's the public mood on these things?
Yeah, so it's mixed. There's obviously a huge portion of the population that's outraged and thinks that this is disgusting and really don't want this to continue. Trump did this in his first administration as well. He was actually literally putting the
Mm,
children of people seeking asylum, he was putting them in cages after separating the families. And
yeah.
by the way, the estimate was that most of those children would never be reunited with their families. Like the separation was uh, semi-permanent. Like it
Mm,
was
mm,
catastrophic because the government did such a poor job of keeping track of everybody involved. And there was outrage then too, but not the kind of outrage that you would expect. Like not the kind of outrage that would, like if this had happened in France,
mm.
Paris would have burnt to the ground. You know, like this is
Yeah, the French are different. They fight their politics differently. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. You know, like I think it was 2004, George Bush Jr. forced South Korea to start importing US beef. The riots that followed
Yeah.
were insane. And it was, you think, wow, it's just because they don't want low quality beef. They want to have high quality beef. They're willing to break their own cities.
Yeah.
And you look at what the United States puts up with, the kind of tolerance that the American public has, it's bewildering and baffling. I don't understand the patience.
Mm.
Having said that, we all know that there is an element of racism and xenophobia that allows people to go, well, he shouldn't have come here anyway. You
Yeah.
know, they brought this problem in on themselves. They're the ones that are fault. They're illegal. It used to say in the Texas Constitution that it was you could not declare an individual to be illegal.
Mm.
They could commit a crime and the crime could be illegal, but the individual themselves could not be made illegal. And in the late 90s, I want to say it was 98, Texas had a constitutional amendment that changed it to say instead of no person shall be declared illegal, it became no citizen. And it clearly paving the way for an anti-immigrant, anti uh, brown and black person kind of policy where you could say, well, that person is illegal.
Mm,
And just
mm,
the,
mm.
the idea of it is so outrageous and violates all norms around human rights and civil rights.
Yeah, having said all of that, Roy, there was that interregnum period between the two Trump administration. Sleepy
Yeah,
Joe. Now,
Sleepy Joe.
Under Sleepy Joe, was there a continuity of policy with regard to immigration? Because I know that the Trump administration, Trump 47, makes a big deal that Sleepy Joe was sleepy and therefore let everyone in. But how true was that? Because I remember there were quite a few scandals even under his watch with regard to the
Yeah,
treatment of immigration. So was there continuity between Trump 45 and Joe Biden?
yeah, there was, and that was, I think that was shocking because so
Yeah.
many of the things that I think people were voting for Biden, to correct, like the treatment of immigrants arriving at the border, Biden didn't correct it. He just kept doing them.
Right.
He did eventually at one point dump the policy where you forced refugee asylum claimants to they had to stay in Mexico. Because when you think about that, that violates our treaty on refugees. The world signed a treaty in the 1950s, and then the United States signed on late. I think it was the 1970s, but we did sign on eventually, where you can't send a person back if they claim that they're a refugee, right? An immigrant you can, but a refugee you can't.
Yep.
But you can investigate the refugee claim. And if you conclude that they lied, then you can send them back. But you have to let them in. And of course, Trump was like, no, no, I'm sending you back to Mexico. You can do your claim from Mexico. Biden
Mm.
did abandon it, but then brought it back and started putting the refugee claimants back in Mexico. And you're like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. So the irony of it is that Biden was a continuation in many ways of Trump policy. So there wasn't that much disruption. But honestly, Trump's policies were a continuation of many of Obama's policies. Obama earned the nickname deporter in chief. He
Mm.
deported more people in his administration than any president had ever done,
Yeah.
even more than Trump in his first term. Even when you do it per year,
Mm.
and
And yet he's a
Obama also
Democrat
the
hero.
World War.
He's the hero, right? He's not the
He
villain.
he should be. All the people who hate immigrants should love Obama and not
Yeah.
be that excited about Trump, honestly, because really he hasn't done that much compared to Obama.
Really quite. I mean, honestly, I sit here listening to you and well, metaphorically scratching my head, wondering what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's insane. Okay, so Roy, from America, we travel now internationally to where you're located in the Middle East. So today, as we record on October 7, this date marks 2 years since Hamas's attacks on Israel, the event that ignited the current Gaza crisis. Tens of thousands have died since. Gaza lies in ruins and the world remains divided over justice and vengeance. Roy, before we talk policy, let's talk humanity. What does it say about us 2 years on that the wounds of that day have only deepened and that neither side seems capable of imagining peace?
I mean, the world has been ignoring this problem for 77 years. This didn't just happen. And I think that's one of the things that's jarring about this moment is so many people think of it as a 2-year-old crisis instead of a 77-year-old crisis.
Yeah.
I think at some level, the world had decided we give up on the Palestinian issue. We're not even going to think about it anymore. And we had forgotten that the Palestinians even existed. So what happened 2 years ago sort of forced us to remember their existence. And then of course Israel decided that it was going to go full genocide and began this unbelievably horrific campaign in Gaza. And by the way, they've ramped up actions in the West Bank, in Syria, and in Lebanon. I was actually
Yeah.
just in Lebanon a couple of months ago, and while I was there, Israel was bombing. And
Mm.
part of the tour of Lebanon was, oh, see this bridge here? Israel blew it up in 2006. See this apartment building? Israel blew it up in 2006. And so you just sort of get sort of a sense of there's this rogue state that runs around blowing up its neighbors. It's committing genocide against the native population in its land because it wants to use that land for its own people and
Mm.
its own purposes. And most of the world has been really passive about this. Having said that, there's now a shift. The
Mm.
UK, France, Canada have all recognized Palestine. At some level, it doesn't mean much, right? So what you recognize it, it's not like you're going to do anything to enforce it. If in 2001 we blew Iraq up because we wanted to defend Kuwait's sovereignty, there's no likelihood that anybody's going to blow Israel up to defend Palestine's sovereignty. So at the
Yeah.
end of the day, there's clearly a double standard when it comes to Palestine and Palestinian rights. I think the real problem is that the average person on the planet doesn't see the Palestinian population as fully human.
Yeah.
Because if Palestinians are fully human, then what Israel is doing should have triggered some kind of UN reaction. It should have triggered some kind of international condemnation that had a meaningful impact. Right now, Germany and the United States send it weapons like there's no tomorrow, send it money like it's no tomorrow, and Germany and the United States prop up the genocide and make it possible. And
And Britain too. Britain too. It's still
that's
selling
true.
weapons, you know. I
Yeah,
just
even
heard
after
a
recognizing Palestine.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Khaliji Arabs or Gulf Arabs and others have long used the Palestinian cause as a cause célèbre rather than as a problem to solve. Is that still the case, Roy? Have Gulf capitals turned the Palestinian issue into a talking point rather than a responsibility?
That's a complicated question because you're right. Like at some level, there's always been this like, oh, we're so mad, and then on the
Mm.
side there was nothing really being done. I think some states have a better track record than others in terms of trying to do something meaningful. I was actually in Qatar earlier this year. Since COVID, my ability to keep track of time has kind of fallen apart. And they were hosting an event where they had brought in all these top Palestinian activists. And the goal was to sort of try and figure out how to jumpstart the peace process. And that type of action is clearly warranted and necessary because until the Palestinian people can speak for themselves, right? There's not much the rest of the world can do anyway.
Mm.
So it's a mixed bag. But yeah, for the most part, I think it's fair to say that most Arab states, not just the GCC, have paid lip service to the Palestinian problem and haven't really done all that much. I say most because clearly Syria and Egypt and Lebanon have taken the brunt of the cause of the Palestinians. In Egypt, not so much since they made a deal with the Israelis, but certainly in the beginning it was. I think something like 40,000 Egyptians have died in Arab-Israeli wars. It's a non-zero cost for Egypt. And then, of course, Egypt has to maintain this bloated military because of the fear that there'll be another Arab-Israeli war at some point down the road, which is a huge drain on Egypt's economy. And it's like this constant issue, this constant festering issue. Jordan is like 60% refugee.
Yeah.
It's not just Palestinians, it's also Iraqis and Syrians, but how do you maintain a state that's 60% refugee? Like it's almost like it's a giant refugee camp.
Well, there are a lot
And
of
then
angry people in those camps,
yeah,
you know.
and with a good reason.
Yeah, yeah.
At the end, the UN has resigned itself to the idea that the Palestinians will, for all perpetuity, like for forever, be in a state of refugee status. That's kind of a sad statement about where we are in 2025 for human rights, when it's okay, it's acceptable that the Palestinian population remain in that state.
So, Roy, how well are Trump 45's Abraham Accords faring amid what many describe as a genocide in Gaza? Are these agreements still a diplomatic achievement or a moral burden now too heavy for the signatories to bear?
That's also a tricky question because the hope was if you normalize relations with Israel, Israel would calm down and stop operating out of trauma.
Yeah.
And then at some point, real dialogue would start to kick in. And as Israel's economy integrated with the rest of the Arab world, Israel would eventually come to see Arabs as fully human and maybe want to make some kind of gesture. It might be 50 years or 100 years down the road, but some kind of fixing a moment with the Palestinian population. I think most people now have concluded that's dead. That maybe there's a hope that at some point something can be restarted, but I don't know how. How do you walk away from the death of tens of thousands of Palestinians? How do you walk away from the fact that Gaza's in a rubble heap? I don't know how you just ignore that.
Well, of course, we've got the Trump Netanyahu 20-point peace plan that demands
Yeah,
Hamas
but these
disarm
really,
and yeah, I
yeah.
mean that is going to hopefully solve everything. You'd be surprised how many people have come
I,
across who actually truly think that this is a thing. But to me, it just looks like a path to bureaucratization of occupation. And that's the best case scenario. That's the best
I mean,
case.
I think that is the goal, right? Is that they want to give Israel the win, the full win, or
Yeah.
at least as close as you can get to the full win, because I think the Nazis will attest to this. Genocide is really hard. The United States will too.
Yeah. Mm,
Native Americans are 1.3% of the U.S. population. We didn't get them to zero.
mm,
They survived, and they're as a percentage of population, they're growing, not shrinking.
mm,
So genocide is just not an easy thing to pull off. This is weird, but people don't like dying, and they
mm.
struggle hard to protect themselves and their families, and they make babies. And I think at some level, Israel kind of has to come to terms with the fact that they're not going to be able to succeed in finishing off the Palestinian population. So I think the peace deal's goal is to just make it so that Gaza is under full Israeli control, like eliminate the possibility of any kind of sovereignty.
Mm.
Even if Hamas signed it, we all know how this is going to pan out. It's going to pan out like every single deal that has ever been made by the Israelis. They will break it in 2 months and bomb the living hell out of the place. So there's no point. I mean, this is the problem with the situation where Europe and the United States blindly support Israel. They've made it so that Israel can misbehave with no serious consequence until Europe and the United States go, Israel, you can't do this anymore. There's no reason for Israel not to continue doing it. In fact, it's the opposite. By having Israel stay in a permanent state of crisis, it keeps the money flowing. If peace were to suddenly break out, what would be the incentive Europe and the United States would have to send it all this military equipment and money? So the Israelis feel themselves sort of trapped in this cycle.
Mm.
All you have to do to stop that cycle is start to hold them accountable. And you can. The Holocaust, I'm part German. I have shame for the Holocaust, even though my people left Europe in 1904. Like, we had nothing to do with it. We missed it by more than 3 decades. I still have the shame. I get it. It's just, it's been 80 years. It's time now to hold Israel accountable for what they've done to the Palestinians.
Okay, so having said all of that, though, Roy, given Gaza's devastation and the West Bank's fragmentation, with these checkpoints and Israeli-only roads and ever-expanding
Walls.
Jewish settlements, how can anyone still believe in a two-state solution?
I don't know. Here's the tragedy. We already have the two-state solution. That's what we have right now.
Mm,
What the Palestinian Authority is doing what Israel envisioned, which is that they would be the capo in the concentration camp working for the gods.
right.
And
Mm,
at the end of the day, if you believe in the two-state solution, congratulations, you've already won. The Bantustan system that South Africa created is exactly
mm,
what Israel has effectively created between Gaza and the West Bank.
mm,
The only way to create a just end solution is a one-state solution. It needs to be like South Africa, a single secular state with guarantees for the Jewish population, the Muslim population, the Christian population, the Druze population, and everybody else that's there. Right? There's actually an Armenian population that needs to be protected as well. Like there's so many factors here, and it can all be done with a good constitution. There's no reason why you can't create a system where Jews can live in peace in Palestine, speak Hebrew, send their kids to Jewish schools, go to synagogue, and live a good life. This thing that it's all or nothing. If we get our way, or we're gonna fight to the death, is just nonsensical. It's trauma. This is trauma talk.
And also there's something else that I can add to it, and that is Arab culture sadly holds tightly onto vendetta. I mean, after so much blood's been spilt in Gaza, can anyone expect remnant Hamas fighters or any other armed Palestinians for that matter to voluntarily disarm because of the Trump peace plan? I mean, when half your family's been bombed and there's no let up, and you can't believe anything the Israelis say under Netanyahu at all, at all. You can't believe them. Oh, believe him in
Yeah.
particular. Where do you go from there? I mean, you hold on to your AK-47, and if you see someone coming towards you that you don't like, you shoot them because it's an eye for an eye.
At one point, I knew somebody who was in Northern Ireland who was
Mm,
Catholic, and we were having a conversation online, and I asked how he felt about Brexit. And his response was, "We're still armed, and we're willing to fight if the British take Northern Ireland out of the European Union.
mm,
It will trigger another round of this." At the end of the day, when you're an oppressed people who have been conquered by a foreign power, you will never, ever surrender fully. You might surrender part way, but you will never surrender fully. You will always hold out on the hope that at some point you will get your liberty, you will get your freedom back, and you will do everything you can to struggle to get that. So that's one thing. It is true that there is a vendetta culture in the Middle East. By the way, the Jews also share that vendetta culture.
indeed, they do.
Um, but it is also just as true that Jewish and Arab culture have really powerful moments of forgiveness. And if you create the right kind of formula, you can totally trigger that. That's what Salahuddin was. That's
Mm,
the reason why the Crusades ended was because Salahuddin showed the Crusaders so much relentless mercy.
mm,
He was just forgiving, forgiving, forgiving over and over and over again to the point where he sort of de-traumatized the Crusaders. So they suddenly became a lot less fanatic
yeah.
and kind of started asking themselves the question, why are we even fighting? And so at the end of the day, that's my hope, is that that version of Middle East culture, the version of mercy and forgiveness, will somehow rise to the surface at some point. the way I imagine it is the Palestinians and Israelis are going to mutually surrender to each other.
Mm.
And you know, it's Middle East culture to hug and kiss the cheeks and maybe even kiss the forehead in an act of, you know, please forgive me, because what's necessary if we're going to get past this nonsense about two-state solutions, this nonsense about, you know, we can just perpetuate this for all eternity. It's not true. Eventually, Israel will run out of energy. It'll run out of energy economically. It'll run out of energy militarily. It'll run out of energy because its fanaticism will go away. It's operating on trauma, and trauma over generations will eventually heal. And when it gets to that point, it'll be like when South Africa began secret negotiations with the ANC in 1987. And that in other words, this is inevitable. There's what I'm saying at this point is let's stop waiting for it to happen in the future. Let's start making it happen now.
Oh, and I agree with all that. I really do. But there is another aspect to it, which I think is a complicating aspect, and that is that a lot of secular Jews have voted with their feet and have actually left Israel. So
It's true.
their ability to influence their domestic constituencies back home is extremely limited. So they may be in New
Yeah.
York, they may be in Los Angeles, they may be in Chicago, they may be anywhere. They may even be in
Germany,
Germany.
Spain.
They're Germany, right?
Yeah.
They're all going back to Germany.
Yeah.
So, well, which is a good thing, but I mean, God, you wouldn't have thought that that would
Yeah.
be on the cards. But the thing is that, they have now voted, which means that the crazies like Netanyahu and all the people who are supporting him, they're the ones in charge. And the people
Yeah.
who are still on the ground, I don't think, I wouldn't say that they're of a fanatical bent, but I would argue that the fanatical elite has forged such tight bonds to the state now, it would be almost impossible for reasonable Israelis on the ground, and I know a few of them, and they're fighting the good fight, Ori Goldberg in particular, but there's only so much you can do when the cards are stacked against you. They have
Yeah.
no cards, right? Politically.
Yeah. And I think, you know, a lot of people have the mindset that once Netanyahu is gone, then something will happen. But I'm not sure that's true. I think
Mm,
you're right. I think that the sort of hardcore ethnic cleansing wing of Israeli political society have really dug in, and
they
it'll be
have.
really hard to dig them out. And you're also right. Like so many of the people that were necessary to create the peace have fled.
Mm,
They've just hit the
yeah,
road.
yeah,
The only positive side to that is it hurts Israel's economy long term. And I think as Israel's economy gets weaker and weaker and weaker, it'll incentivize the Israelis to start to think about negotiating a deal. If I
mm,
were the Israelis, I'd want to negotiate the deal right now because they still have all the cards. Like,
yeah,
why
yeah.
wait until you start to get weak to negotiate? Negotiate from your position of strength.
Mm,
But again, human beings are emotional beings, not rational beings, and I think they're so blinded by trauma and fear and anger and hatred that they can't see straight.
mm,
Which is, you know, it's a tragedy. But I guess the other end of it is it makes it that much more important for everybody else to try to make space for that trauma and try to listen
yeah.
to the Israeli side of things and try to say, yes, I hear you, I acknowledge what you're thinking, so that it can be deflated over time. Because
Mm,
at this point, right, what's the threat Hamas poses to Israel? It has no military ability to finish Israel off. Like, it is not a threat. It could do
yeah.
terrorism and kill Israelis from time to time, but it poses no serious threat to the state of Israel.
Mm,
So this reaction from a military standpoint is completely purely illogical. It
mm, mm.
serves no purpose other than genocide.
Well, I suppose if I was speaking from a Netanyahu perspective, you could say, well, Hamas did invade southern Israel. It was like an army of invasion and and did some horrible things while it was on Israeli soil. But then I would also counter that with, well, what happened to the vaunted Israeli security services? How could
Yeah,
a so-called Hamas army invade southern Israel when Gaza was allegedly meant to be an open air prison with 24/7 guards? Something
Yeah.
happened, something catastrophic happened, and sadly, I don't think we'll ever be alive long enough to see justice in that sense, where Netanyahu was brought to account for whatever the intelligence failure was, because he was prime minister at the time. It was on his watch. And,
Yes.
obviously he has to have some accountability for that action. But, so long as he's prime minister and so long as he's got a weird section of the Knesset supporting him, he's safe. He's safe from prosecution.
He's safe. And
Yeah,
he's safe from prosecution for criminal activity that he's done.
indeed,
He
indeed he
needs
is.
to stay in
Oh.
his position to prevent himself from going to prison.
Well, from going from one extreme politician to another, going to the
Yeah.
European theater. So we've got Vladimir Putin. Now, it's been interesting watching how this war has changed. On the one side, the Ukrainians were barely hanging on. The Russians
Yeah.
kept on pressing, but at massive cost to the Russian soldiery. I mean, the meat grinder really was a meat grinder in the realest possible sense. But can Vladimir Putin now withstand Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russia's oil and gas facilities? I mean, if those revenues shrink as a consequence of Ukrainian military action, does Putin's political legitimacy shrink with them?
So I'm going to take a lesson from World War II.
Mm,
The United States and Great Britain bombed the living hell out of Europe, not just Germany. And
yeah,
we also bombed the countries we were liberating. We bombed everything. It was so bad. We made a list of the cities we weren't going to bomb, and they fit easily on both hands. Right? It's not. I don't think it was a full 10 cities that we just Paris, Rome, Heidelberg, Prague.
mm,
Like
mm.
we picked a group of cities we weren't going to obliterate and just bombed everything else. None of that did anything to accelerate the war's end. In fact, there's a bunch of evidence that when you bomb a city, you prolong the war because it becomes that much harder for you to invade and capture the city because you've just rubbled the streets. It's
Right.
hard to get tanks through, and then
Yep.
the defenders are taking the rubble and building little fortifications and traps everywhere.
Mm,
So, in other words, if you want to capture a city, don't bomb it in advance.
mm.
But we also bombed Germany's oil infrastructure. We went after Germany's oil infrastructure. We bombed Ploesti oil field in Romania. We bombed the refineries in Hamburg. Like any chance we got, we also went after that.
Mhm.
All the evidence points to that did accelerate the end of the war. Going
Yeah.
after Germany's oil capacity was devastating. I think the same is true for Russia. Russia
Yeah.
is surviving in part because it's discounted oil. And so countries that maybe were, a little reluctant to buy oil from Russia are like, no, but it's so cheap, I have to. And if Russia can't sell the discounted oil to the PRC, to India, to the other states that it's selling it to, then it has nothing to sustain its war machine, and Putin is going to start to get into trouble.
Yeah.
Um, Having said that, Putin's done such a good job of clamping down on the Russian state. It'll be hard to dig him out. Uh, you know, up until we keep making this mistake of saying that Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. It invaded Ukraine in 2014. It accelerated the war in 2022. Up until 2022, though, it looked like Putin had had 22 brilliant years of
Mm.
just playing the United States, punishing Georgia, punishing
Mm.
Ukraine. Like it was a really strange. He had such amazing series of victories. He started to look like he couldn't be defeated, and then he
Mm.
made this mistake in 2022 when he accelerated the war in Ukraine. And now it's been like 3 years of wow, maybe he wasn't the genius we thought he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to wonder if he's not gonna at some point start to think I have to extract Russia from this.
Mm.
And Ukraine bombing the oil infrastructure, I think, gives him a good way to incentivize, like, okay, look, guys, we
Mm.
do need to make some kind of deal. We can't afford to do this too long. So I'm hopeful that this will actually push Russia towards ending the war because as long as Russia, as long as Putin isn't paying a real cost for it, there's no reason we can't fight this war for 200 years, right?
Oh
It
yeah, for
it
sure.
it needs to go beyond just high casualty rates. It needs to hurt
Mm.
the economy.
You made mention a couple of times in this interview, which I think is really good because it really drills down on what I also believe, and that is that we are emotional creatures and we are powered not by logic, we're powered by the weirdness in our own heads. So if we
Yeah.
look at that and we see Putin as just a normal human being who has the same foibles as everyone else, so Putin has insulated Moscow and St. Petersburg from the pain of his special military operation against Ukraine. But if fuel runs short in these cities, affecting his oligarchs and other wealthier Russians, does that force Putin's hand or does it shorten his rule? I mean, will Putin then, in an act of desperation, officially declare war against Ukraine? And what would such a move mean for Putin and for Russia?
I mean, I don't know that it'll change that much because and this is me reading Putin. It feels to me like he's invested so much of his identity, his own personal identity, not
Mm,
just his public persona,
yeah.
in winning in Ukraine. It's hard for me to see how he can step back and say I lost,
Mm,
um, or or even make a deal that's so like in 2022, instead of attacking Ukraine, and hindsight is 2020. It looks to me like what he should have done is gone to the Ukrainians and said, "Look, I'm going to attack you unless you right now sign a treaty where you cede Crimea officially once and for all and relinquish all claim to it, and we get a piece of Donetsk and Luhansk or
yeah.
something."
Yeah.
Right? And then the Ukrainians will come back and they'll say, okay, maybe Donetsk, but not Luhansk. Who knows? I don't want to go into those details. But
Mm,
instead of doing the war, negotiating out a deal, because when you think about it, what difference does it make if Russia gains 10% of Ukraine? It's such a tiny chunk of land compared to the size of Russia. It'll have such a small impact on Russia's economic well-being, on its security. From a rational standpoint, this war is purely irrational. There's
yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
Russia's going to
Yeah.
gain that launches Russia into a position of superiority over the United States or the PRC. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
it's chunk change. And in the process, he's wrecked his economic relationship with the European Union. Germany's number one trading partner was Russia. It's not anymore.
mm,
Russia's
mm,
number
mm,
one trading partner used to be Germany. It's not anymore. Like it's now China. His goal in 2000 was to make sure Russia didn't end up underneath China's sphere of influence. He's failed. He launched Russia into China's sphere of influence, and so like from a rational standpoint, he's no longer acting in a way that even lines up with his own best self-interest and his own goals.
mm.
The only thing I can think of is he's stuck in pride, and there needs to be some mechanism to help him save face.
Mhm.
Of course, if you're a NATO leader, you don't want him to save face. You want to grind his face into the dirt.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
and
great.
understandably so, though, because I mean,
Yeah,
there's always that fear that so long as Putin remains in power, and so long as we don't know who's after Putin, because we could end up having someone far worse than Putin ever was.
yeah,
The thing is that Russia still poses a threat until it stops posing a threat. Now, one could also say that this war firstly, Putin wasn't the fourth dimensional chess master that everyone thought he was. And secondly, the
yeah,
war, even if he comes away with 10% of Ukrainian territory, it would be spun as a victory in Moscow, but it's a Pyrrhic victory because he's just sacrificed, I don't know, maybe one or two generation of young Russians, plus the
yeah,
entire military industrial complex, which I think is pushing crap up a hill right now,
yeah.
trying to equip whatever's left of the Russian army. So yeah, I think he's driven Russia off a cliff because however you
He
spin it,
wrecked his sovereignty. He
yep,
wrecked Russia's sovereignty in regard to
yep,
China.
yep.
He wrecked their economy. Like this is a disaster.
History will not forgive him for this.
History will not forgive him. He
Mm.
looked like a genius till 2022, and he looks like
And then he just
he's
left it. Yep, yep,
yeah. He
agreed.
just ruined his legacy.
Mm.
And and at this point, if I were him and I was rational, I would be trying to figure out a way out. But I
Yeah,
don't think he is rational because I think he's operating out of pride and he's stuck. and
Mm.
and I don't think NATO wants to let them off the hook. They've
Yep.
got
Yeah.
them. This is
Yeah.
perfect. A proxy war where you can grind Russia down. Like, why
Mm.
not? I mean, the whole reason
Mm.
NATO was created was because of fear of Russia. And then you
Correct.
have to, what did it take to get Sweden and Finland to give up their neutrality?
Mm.
Talk about epic fail. The whole
Yeah.
goal of the Russians was to break NATO, not expand NATO.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. So many own goals in this, or so many own goals. If we swing from Europe and we look at Asia, Trump has recently paused around $400 million in military aid to Taiwan. Was this, do you think, fiscally driven, or is it a signal of a potential détente with Beijing?
the answer is I have no idea. When
Yep.
Trump does something, it looks so random. It
Yeah.
doesn't look like there's a plan. Now,
Yeah.
I keep being told there's a plan and he's a super genius.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But like it just looks random because he'll do one thing one time and then he switches physics. Like look what he's done with Ukraine. He
Yeah.
brings Zelensky in, browbeats him, berates him. He tries to humiliate him. He humiliates
Yeah.
himself. And
Yeah.
then now all of a sudden he's funding the Ukrainians and talking about how bad Putin is, and you're like,
Mm.
dude, what's going on? Am I in a 1984 nightmare? Eurasia has always been our enemy. We've always been at peace with East Asia. Like I don't
Yeah.
understand what's happening. So if I was China, of course, I would be nervous about this because does
Mm.
this mean the United States is going to walk away from Taiwan, or is this just Trump being random Trump? Um, I think the fact that China has become really loud lately, and that parade was
Mm.
that
Mm.
was a parade,
Yeah, that was a
and that
parade. That was a big one.
was a parade. I don't know how y'all felt in Australia, but I gotta tell you, I was a little scared.
No, no, no. We were quaking in our boots here, especially since we saw the American parade for Donald Trump's birthday, and we saw these guys marching down Pennsylvania Avenue holding drones as if they were pizzas. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like, and then you look at China and it's, oh my God.
You earlier corrected me, and I appreciated it so much. We keep calling these guys fascists, but they're really not. They're not in the same category. This
No.
is one of those examples. Like if Mussolini had done a parade,
Oh, it would
yes,
be.
we all know the
Yep.
Italian military was incompetent in the end, but it would have looked good. It would have been a
Yes.
nice looking parade.
It would absolutely do that. Yes, for sure. For sure. If you want to make the greatest deal ever, it's likely that you will have to throw Taiwan under a bus. Now, if that happens, will that single act invite Beijing to test America's limits further because it knows that it's got Trump to move in a way that it wanted. So let's see if we can get some more out of him and make him feel
Oh
even
yeah.
more uncomfortable with this. And of course, what would such a development mean for other key American allies in the Pacific like South Korea, Japan, and Australia? Because, I mean, I know that we're freaking out over this whole AUKUS bit. We're thinking, is it on? Is it off? Is it on? Is it off? I mean, we've got government officials, Australian government officials saying, there's nothing to worry about, John. No, it's going wonderfully well. And then we've got, public pronouncements from Canberra saying, we don't know what's going on. And then we've got the whole notion of our Prime Minister not being able to sit down with Donald Trump properly since he was re-elected. So I've got to say, I mean, it's like dealing with the schizophrenic. I mean, and that's no disrespect to schizophrenics. It's just an adjective for what we're going through right now. It is foreign policy by schizophrenia.
Yeah, I agree. And it feels so random that you just can't, there's no predicting what's going to happen next. If I was Xi, I would push the limits. I would
Yeah.
push the limits as far
Yeah.
as I could go. I mean, you look
Mm.
at what Xi's doing in with the Philippines
Mm.
and those little atolls that they're arguing over and how far he's pushed. Because you think China is similar to Russia in this way. Like, what would happen if China owned 10 square kilometers more? Nothing. It's meaningless to them. So what's the
Mm.
point in pushing that envelope with the Philippines? Instead of doing that, why not improve your relations with the Philippines, build factories there
Mm.
and trade with them and expand their economy? That's what I would be doing. It's not. Instead, they're bickering over the possibility that there's oil and minerals under the water that they want to grab hold of. It makes me think that that's what I would, what Xi's going to do next is he's going to push hard for Taiwan, because I think he's thinking about it in a similar way that Putin was with Ukraine.
Yeah.
But again, politics out of pride is a really terrible way to do politics. She could easily go the other direction and start normalizing relations with the Republic of China and make it so that there's two Chinas. And how many computers are we buying where some of the components were made in the Republic of China and then some of the components were made in the People's Republic of China? And you think they're already connected? Why not just take it further? I'm a firm believer that if you link people together economically, you'll link them together politically and culturally. And so I just don't understand why we're in a place where there's so much aggression. I really feel like none of this aggression is necessary to achieve the goals. Like if your goal is to unify with the Republic of China, it could be done. Do normalization, economic growth, have cultural exchange. It might take 50 years or 100 years, but then you'd have a willing partner instead of somebody that you forced into it. Forced into it never works. Just ask the Indonesians with East Timor. It didn't work. And think of how big Indonesia is compared to East Timor. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it should have, if it's only a matter of might, then, by the way, I'm really proud of how Indonesia has handled East Timor's independence since. Like, I think they've done, like their military cooperation, economic cooperation, they're not bitter about it. They're acting like adults. It's so weird to think that there might be adults somewhere on the planet.
Well, you find that in Southeast Asia, they're a little bit different over there. They think differently. They've got their ASEAN mindset, so it's not aggressive. It's all neutral. It's all swing state based, And I mean, it's got its problems. Don't get me wrong. It's not a perfect bunch,
sure.
but nonetheless, when you talk about adults in the room, I think you'll find a lot in Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, and in Manila. There are people of quite high sophistication and skill. But then when we're measured against the most powerful countries where idiocy seems to be the order of the day. Now, we can talk about Moscow, we can talk about Beijing, we can talk about Washington, or dare I say Brussels in Europe. Yeah, the political capacities are found wanting in many ways. But in Southeast Asia, they may be poor, but they're pretty good.
So one of the things that's happened to me is my stereotypes, my racism, if you will, keep increasing for Southeast Asia, and I find myself falling more and more in love with them every day. Like I can't, every time I meet an Indonesian or a Filipino or a Malaysian, I'm like, oh my God, you guys might be the kindest, most generous people I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, and you're lucky because in the UAE you've got a lot of them, and they're all brilliant.
You do,
right?
And
they're all brilliant.
Constant interaction. I'm like, so much.
Oh, so do I. So do I. I said to a number of my mates when I came back from Abu Dhabi, I said, you know what really never ceases to amaze me? The Filipinos that I've met in Abu Dhabi or in the UAE generally, even in Dubai, are some of the brightest people I have ever met, and yet their country is rubbish. What there's a sort of cultural disconnect because some of the Filipinos that I met while I was working at the Emirates Center were just outstanding intellects and on top of the game, and yet they're working for another country in another country rather than working for the benefit of their own country, because I think that the Filipino political elite don't really give two hoots about the talent that is excess to their capacities. So they'll take who they think is pliable enough to shape into their their circle, but beyond that they're quite happy to throw the rest of them out as excess human capital, which I think is the wrong way of seeing things, because if they were to harness that, oh my God, there'd be no stopping the Philippines.
I totally agree with you. Like you look at the talent, like the United States hospital system would collapse tomorrow if the Philippines didn't exist.
Australia too.
Their nurses and doctors. Like it's insane what we've done to the Philippines. And you think if all that talent went back home, what they could do. There's so much talent in it. You're right. It's a missed opportunity on the part of the Filipino government.
Now,
Um,
Roy, I think we've spoken for almost 2 hours. I mean, this is almost verging on Joe Rogan territory. Yeah, yes.
oh,
Now, look, honestly, it's
awesome.
been fantastic, and I could have you here for another 2 hours, but I know that you might have other things to do. But there is one question I want to sign off on, and that is the government shutdown of the United States. So, we've done the world. Now we come back to the United States. We started off with the United States. We have to come back to it. What
Yeah.
is what is the reason for the shutdown? What do you think will be able to reopen the doors? And I've heard something. What was that idiot Mike Johnson? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. What is that person Mike Johnson saying, or one of his ilk, who said today that, oh, well, it's so very hard to then reopen the government, once it's shut. Well, it's like if everyone's playing these stupid games, and I don't blame the Trump administration completely for this, because this has always happened, irrespective who happens to be in the White House. So Democrats, Republicans, they all play these ridiculous games. But what's the benefit? What's the net benefit for Americans? And does government just, as if by magic, once everyone has put their toys away and stopped, throwing brickbats at each other in Congress, do they all go back to work? Do they still have their jobs? Or is it like, no, sorry, son, you're being furloughed for life, and then maybe a month or two later, some a knock on the door happens, and someone gives you your job back as a contractor, where you're earning about 3 times your former salary. I mean, what
Yeah.
incompetent way of seeing this can you make sense of here? Because I don't know anything about this. It's fascinating and strange.
Okay. So here's the stupidity of the situation. I'm not sure if this is the fourth or fifth shutdown. I can definitely remember three previous ones. I think there was four previous ones.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the fifth. So Congress decided that it didn't want to run up a psychotic debt. So it put a ceiling on the debt and then said the only way you can transcend the ceiling is if we get together and vote to exceed it. So every single time we've ever reached that point, Congress has voted to exceed it, except those five or so occasions when Congress hesitated to vote to exceed it. So the first thing is, why are we running up this psychotic debt?
Mm.
And the way to fix that is to just start taxing the rich. That's just all there
Yeah.
is to it. It'll stimulate the economy. You can use the money for job growth. There's no reason to not do it. The rich are just hoarding their money anyway. Like, why does a person need $100 billion? There's this nonsensical. So
Mm,
we
mm.
go back to Eisenhower level tax rates and fix the system. But we're
Yeah.
not going to, so that's no point in talking about it anymore. In the 1990s, the Republicans decided to weaponize this against Bill Clinton, and they shut the government down. It actually backfired on them because the American public went, "What'd you do that for?" Because all of a sudden their social security checks aren't showing up, and the military isn't getting paid, and the national parks aren't working anymore. Like,
Mm,
there was a
mm.
serious disruption to the economy and people's lives, and so the Republicans got hammered in the next election. They then they threatened to do it to Barack Obama. He capitulated. That was in 2011. They then did it to Barack Obama in 2012 and got punished in that election. So the lesson it seemed that politicians might want to learn is, if you're the guy responsible for shutting down the government, you're going to get punished in the next election.
Mhm.
Um, in 2018, the strangest ever shutdown the world has ever seen happened. So the Republicans lost the November election, so they lost both houses of Congress in 2018 because the American public had started to turn against Trump and the Republicans. In December, so they lose in November, the new government goes into effect in January. In December, the Republicans do a shutdown. They own both houses of Congress. This was the Republicans fighting against the Republicans. The Democrats had nothing to do with the shutdown because they were the
Mm.
minority party in both houses. They had no ability to do a shutdown. And so the
Mm.
Republicans turned on each other like rabid dogs. They shut the government down, and there was no consequence for it because the election had already happened and they had already lost. And
Crazy
so,
stuff.
yeah, it was crazy stuff. And it was all about the budget they wanted to pass and the tax cuts they wanted to get through, and
Mm,
they ended up doing this really weird thing. This round is because Trump wanted to seriously undermine the funding to the Affordable Care Act. The
mm,
Democrats decided this was a hill worth dying on, and they had enough Republican support that even though they don't control either house, they could trigger a shutdown because there were enough Republicans willing to go along with it. So it's a bipartisan shutdown in effect,
mm, mm,
where a
mm.
group of Republicans and the Democrats are working to prevent the debt ceiling from being raised and the budget from being passed. It's a mess. But so the irony of this is that two-thirds of the people who would be hurt if the Affordable Care Act got defunded are Republicans. In other words, the people who vote for Trump, that Trump and his ilk have want to defund their health care coverage, and the
Yeah.
Democrats have thrown down to protect their health care coverage. For me, the really interesting thing will be to see how this plays out. Are the Democrats going to get blamed for shutting the government down? Are they going to get credit for defending the Affordable Care Act? Like, how does this roll out in the average mind? I don't know, because it's such a weird situation. He's going to fire whole sections of the government. He's going to use this as an opportunity to fire them. You ask the question, what happens to the government when you go back in? The reality is you lose talent every single time you do these shutdowns, because there are
Right.
people who are like, I'm done. I'm going to go get a job in the private sector where, like you said, paid 3 times as much money. One
Mm,
of the great disasters of Amazon and Google and all these big corporations is the brain drain that they've done.
mm,
They've stolen talent from universities, they've stolen talent from the government. People that could have been working on solving these environmental issues, working as researchers, are coding for Google instead.
mm, mm.
And Google's a great place to work at, and they pay you a fantastic amount of money, and they really take care of their employees. They're not evil. It's
Yeah.
just there's a consequence for us putting this technology over everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're going to pay a price for it.
Mm.
The Republicans and the Democrats are now in the process of accelerating it by encouraging more and more government employees to seek uh, employment elsewhere. And then Trump threatening to fire even more people after he fired all the people earlier this year, with his stupid Doge program. That talent doesn't come back.
Yeah. Okay. Taking a step back and from an Australian perspective, so forgive me because, this is just so weird. Um, Hasn't the Republican mantra always been small government? So, in a
Yeah.
sense, couldn't Trump just turn around and say, well, I'm doing what I've been elected to do. I've reduced government
Yeah.
and government waste. And government waste, I mean, it's not going to be obvious until all of this is gone. Like if the Affordable Health Care Act gets swept away, and then all of a sudden people are saying, well, I can't afford to go and see a GP. I can't afford it. I can't send my kids. So we all end up, having all kinds of ailments that we can't get rid of anymore. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I think that that's going to come back and bite someone in the backside quite savagely, I would imagine.
It, it could. The question is, who are the voters going to blame? And it is my experience that the voters frequently blame the wrong guy.
Yeah,
Uh, I have had so many conversations with people where they'll say they're mad about X. That's why they're going to vote for Party C, and it
yeah,
turns out Party C is what created X. And you're like, but
yeah, yeah,
don't
yeah.
you see? That's how we got here to begin with. And they're like, oh, and then they immediately go do it anyway. Like it doesn't
Mm.
matter that you explained it to them; they're still going to go vote the way they wanted to.
Well,
So
Trump's default setting is blame Biden. Biden is the quintessence of evil, right? So everything
he
that's wrong
is,
with America is a Biden-esque Democrat thing. So, I mean, I can see how
especially
that's going to go.
all his bad decisions from his first term, he blames on Biden.
Yeah.
And, like the USMCA is the worst treaty ever negotiated. He negotiated it, and he's saying it's
Yeah,
and then he
yeah.
blames Biden. And you're like, whoa, this is so weird. I am in a 1984 nightmare.
Well, if I was Joe Biden, I'd be kind of happy I'm in that sort of state about almost springing off the mortal coil because, quite frankly, I just, yeah, I don't know.
I feel
Oh well.
sorry for Biden. You know, he wasn't the greatest president the world has ever seen, but he
No,
has
no,
to
he
be.
wasn't.
I failed because he had one job, and that was to prevent Trump from getting a second term.
His biggest and most disastrous failure of all, I suppose.
Exactly. Competent enough, he convinced the American public that they didn't need another Trump term, and he couldn't do it.
Yeah, he couldn't. Poor bugger. Anyway, Roy, thanks very much for sharing your insights again on the Focus. That was an epic, epic interview. So thank you very much for your time. Brilliant.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. I love talking to you. I love your show.
Yeah, thank you. From Dubai, UAE, that was historian and political theorist Dr. Roy Casagranda. Today, as we mark 2 years since the October 7 attacks, we're reminded that history never ends. It just repeats, refined by pain. What struck me most in this conversation was how easily power can slide from governance into domination, how the rhetoric of strength can mask the fragility of systems, from Washington's shutdowns to Gaza's ruins. Perhaps Trump isn't the cause, but the symptom, a mirror reflecting our exhaustion with complexity, our hunger for certainty, and our willingness to accept control in place of competence. If democracies fall, it won't be because of a single man, but because we stopped asking questions. So keep asking, keep thinking. Now, on to questions for the audience. Did the Trump Hegseth Quantico meeting strengthen civilian control or blur the line between military service and political loyalty? Is Trump's 20-point Gaza plan a genuine path to stability or just an attempt to enforce a ceasefire through the preservation of Israeli dominance? Can any democracy survive when strength is defined only by control? Where should a leader's power, any leader's power, end? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a free way to support us. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the Auscast Network, iTunes, and Spotify. We would appreciate your 5-star reviews. Do you have comments or questions about the podcast? Post them in the comments section on YouTube, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. My thanks as ever to the producers of The Focus, Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. Please stay connected with us on social media. Follow me on X at BruniDoctor and follow The Focus on X at TheFocus_Sage. And don't forget Blue Sky on the Focus pod adl.bsky.social. From Adelaide, South Australia, you've been listening to The Focus.